lot of good books this year.
You did, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I also did read 180 books this year, so I've read a lot of books.
Increased my audio listening to 1.5 speed now, so I'm welcomed to the psychopath club, I guess. But
all rise. Judge Phoebe Cornell presiding. This book is on trial. Welcome back, Second Pagers. This is Beyond the First Page podcast with siblings Phoebe, Phil, and Isaac. I'm Phoebe.
I'm Phil.
I'm Isaac.
And this is Club Meeting 27, the last club meeting of 2024, and a wrap on season 1 of Beyond the First Page podcast. And we are discussing The Calamity of Souls by David Baldacci. And before we get started on that, I just want to remind everybody that this is a book club style podcast. And so we will be discussing major plot points and spoilers from throughout A Calamity of Souls. And if you don't want to get that book ruined for you, which is a courtroom drama, there will be spoilers that we really recommend that you read that book and then come on and listen to the discussion. And if you like this podcast, please give us 5 stars on Spotify. Follow us on Spotify, Instagram, TikTok. And before we talk about the book in 60 seconds, we always do a icebreaker to warm us up. And because this is the last book of the season, so to speak, we would like to do a year in review. So I'm asking Phil and Isaac and myself to share your favorite book of 2024 and then the book that you've recommended the most to people on our reading list for this year. So again, that's the book you liked most in 2024. That could be any book. And then specifically to our reading list, the book that you're recommending the most to people who are listening to the podcast for the first time, trying to get back into reading, lovers of reading, whatever the case may be.
A lot of good books this year.
You did, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through this list, my Goodreads. Problem is I also did read 180 books this year, so I've read a lot of books.
Oh my God. I was just going to say that I'm almost at my goal for 100.
Yeah.
That's my goal for next year. I think I'm at like 62 or something.
That's really good, Isaac.
That's really good, yeah.
Isaac, how much would you say your reading has increased since joining the podcast?
Well, I listen at 1.5 speed now, so.
What?
Yeah. Yes.
Moving up in the world.
Kind of crazy.
Wow, this is really difficult. Because
yeah. Okay, I think I can go.
Okay, yeah, Isaac, over to you.
So the book I find myself recommending the most from our podcast list is Foster. And there's 2 reasons. It was my second favorite book of the year that we have read, and you can also read it in an hour. So it's a very low bar of entry for the podcast. I think also we had a great podcast episode with it. So if we're trying to get people onto the podcast, it's a great one to start. Very easy to read, a great story, and the podcast episode was very good. My favorite book of all of 2024 might actually be My Name is Red, also on the podcast. I'm debating between that and The Waiting by Michael Connelly, the new Renee Ballard book. But that's like an easy one for me because I love those.
The Bosch books.
The Michael Connelly universe that he has. So I think I am going to say My Name is Red, my favorite book of 2024. So 2 wins for the pod there.
Wow, that is a win. Phil, are you knowing yours or do you want me to go?
I don't know. If you asked me on a different day and gave me like some time, it might change. Because I've read a lot of books this year, but I think that I think one series that I just could not stop reading, and there's been a couple. So again, I'm like really hesitant to say anything definitive. But The Gray Sister, it's a trilogy by. It's the Book of the Ancestor trilogy by Mark Lawrence. So it's Red Sister, Gray Sister, Holy Sister, and it's about these like badass girls that are in a warrior nun convent, and it's
I remember you talking
freaking
about this.
awesome. It's so good. I think the book that I recommend from the podcast the most is either Casual Vacancy, just because it's like people have familiarity with J.K. Rowling. I have Foster a couple times. But yeah, I think I'll just say Casual Vacancy because it really is like just so different. And I think it's people like are interested to read another J.K. Rowling that's not Harry Potter. And so if I'm going to get someone engaged, it's going to be something they're a little familiar with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. That was a really good book too. You can't go wrong recommending that. So my recommendation for people for our podcast list, the one I go to the most often is Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. I think the vast majority of like the demographic I'm recommending books to would enjoy it the most. It's well written. It's like a Kristen Hanna style book, but with actually good writing. So I think a lot of like female demographic really resonates, and it's an actually really funny and good book. The podcast episode, I kind of threw this in there because I wanted to say this. The podcast episode that I would recommend the most would be Baseball Gaijin by Aaron Fishman. I thought that was a really interesting podcast. He was a very interesting guest, and I think I've gotten a lot of feedback from the fans that they really enjoyed that episode. And my most favorite book of 2024 was Freshwater for Flowers by Valerie Perrin. That was an excellent book. I think I read it halfway through the year, and it's remained my favorite throughout. So I know I mentioned that on an earlier episode, but that's my 24 in wrap. And yeah, Phil was mentioning he has read 180 books this year. I am about to reach my goal, but I decided to read the Swordlight Archives right at the end of the year. So it's taking a long
That's
time
a
to get through.
57 hour book. Yeah, that one's rough.
So I'm almost at 100.
I will say I wasn't going to say my number, but to flex a little bit more because I'm already Phoebe flexed for me, is I do not read books that are under 10 hours long either. So this is not like Phil, besides like Foster and
besides the one we've like done for the book club, because there's been a couple that are shorter.
I don't screw with books that are 15 hours because then I just have to keep finding new books to read. So unless there's like 10 of them, I won't touch a book that's under 15 hours because it's not going to be like, it's just going to be, I'm going to have to find a new book. So I think they're legit. They're legit.
I don't trust you. I don't trust you.
Oh my
There's
gosh.
some weird Hermione Granger time travel something going on here. I just counted mine. Mine's at 52.
That's good, Isaac.
I have a goal for next year of 100, but I was just going over my list of books that I am thinking about reading, and I'm pretty interested in world history right now, and a lot of these books seem to be behemoths. So I don't know if 100 is going to be, being able to get there. But
dang,
180 is crazy.
Isaac, you should try the Iron King, Maurice Drouin. I'll send you over. It starts right at the end of the Knights Templar. George R. R. Martin called it the original Game of Thrones. It's like a lot of political and intriguing. So
historical fiction.
Yeah, it's about France.
Nice.
King Philip the Fair.
Yeah. I just discovered a series that looks really cool. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. The Conqueror series. It's historical fiction on Genghis Khan.
By Conrad Goodwin. Yeah, it's really good.
God, dude, there is nothing
Phil hasn't read.
Yeah. So I'm
the Julius Caesar. The Julius Caesar one is better by him, I will say.
Oh, really?
Wait, were these the ones you recommended, Phil, in the podcast previously?
I have recommended them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go.
Did you get them from Phil, Isaac, or you found them on your own? Okay. He was like, I never listened to that.
Totally my idea.
The internet thinks that his Genghis Khan one is the best one.
Is better. Yeah. Maybe it's because the Julius Caesar. It's a little easier to jump into those when you know anything about it. And again, like I know nothing about
Yeah.
Genghis Khan, which is like
Yeah.
cool, but also a
Yeah.
little
It's hard.
to get into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've flexed on all of our listeners yet again,
Wait,
Isaac,
can
would
we
you
just
able to
say
do that?
before we move on from that, but I think that even if you've read 3 books this year, if you're listening to this podcast, like, thank you, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
Part of the goal of this podcast was to have us connect as siblings, but another goal is to just get people into reading. So if you weren't reading and now you read 1 book where you used to read 0 books,
That's a win.
that's like a huge win. So
Yeah.
I really like if you touch double digits, I'm thoroughly impressed. Like 10 books, I think is a super approachable number of books. That is like really impressive still. And the amount of like pleasure and learning you can get out of 10 books a year is, I mean, crazy.
Yeah, I think also I would say as like a as another aside, I think I've been able to connect via Instagram with a few fans who have been reading and are interested in different books that we're talking about. But I hope that in 2025, like we can connect even more with people. It's been awesome to get feedback from people on what they like, what they don't like, what books they want to read. We were able to release recently the list for Q1 of 2025, and we were able to pick a fan selection from that. So we had submissions from fans and we were able to pick 1 book from that. So yeah, just like the involvement of people has been awesome, and really looking forward to connecting more in 2025 with people about books. So yeah. Good job reading, everybody, and talking about it. Okay, and now we can do the A Calamity of Souls in 60 seconds.
All right, so this is A Calamity of Souls in 60 seconds. Jack Lee is a white defense attorney in Southern Virginia who is getting by in his solo practice defending people who have been accused of minor crimes until his neighbor's housekeeper seeks his help. Her grandson-in-law, Jerome Washington, a young black man, has been accused of killing the old white couple that he works for. Jack takes on the case with the ambition to finally do something impactful in his life. The town immediately pushes back, threatening Jack for defending a black man, and the state of Virginia is throwing all the firepower they have at the case, having the attorney general himself prosecute Jerome. Jack is given help by Desiree DuBose, a lawyer for the NAACP who has experience defending murder cases and who even has won a case at the Supreme Court. Together, she and Jack fight through an obviously rigged system to free both Jerome and his wife Pearl, who the prosecution has accused of assisting in the murders. Jack and his family are forced to take a hard look at their ambivalence toward the racism all around them and ultimately take a stand for what they know is right and for their clients. Jack and Desiree are able to find the real killers in the case, but it is only a small victory in the still very prejudiced town.
All rise. Judge Phoebe Cornell presiding. This book is on trial. A Calamity of Souls is on trial for being a bad book. And before I hear both sides,
right in as the bailiff and the judge.
Hell yeah.
Before I hear both sides of this argument, I want to start with some opening comments to both of you, gentlemen. And while the prosecution is claiming that this is a bad book, the defense has an opportunity to come back and say why this is a pretty okay book. And so this is not a bad book, I should say.
I would like to make what's the thing where you like interrupt them?
Objection.
Yes. Objection.
I got to get a gavel. Quiet down in the courtroom. No,
Objection, Your Honor. Please watch your tone. There is just only a bad book and not guilty of being a bad book. I don't have to prove anything else.
Beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay.
Which Noted. Was a huge issue in this book that was stressed many
Objection.
times. Okay, yeah.
The prosecution.
Keep your comments. So yeah, my opening comments are, I see both sides of this argument. I see where there is problematic issues that were maybe, in the lane of somebody telling a story that wasn't theirs to tell. some problematic language, and there was also some Nora Roberts-esque interpersonal relationships. But there was also different concepts and ideas that were being brought forward that were good for a white audience to consider, and an audience to consider, and maybe people who are unfamiliar with Jim Crow in the South. And so I'll be turning it over to the prosecution to begin his case.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. And I want to center my case around three main points. I think first and most important is that this book was utterly predictable, both in characters and in plot. And I'll present evidence to show that, which I have not shown the defense because I learned in this book that that's totally cool.
I think
Which
that was
again
a
brought
objection.
up many
Objection.
times.
I think that was a Jim Crow law.
Sustained.
Okay. Yes. So, second, I want to talk about the dialogue that was completely uninspiring and it was Nora Roberts-esque of over-explaining everything and leaving nothing to the reader. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, because of the entire point of this novel being set in the Jim Crow South, I think his attempt at racial social justice was not only flat-footed, but ill-mannered and poorly thought out and then poorly executed. I have one piece of evidence for this that I think is just utterly damning that I will not be providing any further evidence because I sort of got DNA on that one.
Okay, we'll wait for opening statements from the defense and then we'll hear it.
All right. I had to write mine out because I want to make sure that I include everything in this very important trial. Judge and second pagers, it's good to be here today. Happy New Year. Pleased to have spent an entire year with all of you. In taking the
Objection,
strategy,
relevancy.
in taking
Get to the point, Mr. Cornell.
In taking the strategy of the defense in the very book on trial, in order to condemn the defendant, the jury must find him guilty beyond reasonable doubt. And with the evidence I will introduce on this podcast today, I'm certain you will decide that A Calamity of Souls is not guilty of being a bad book. You will see that it has all the elements of a good story, with a good mixture of love interest, even a twist to keep its readers on its toes. It has moral lessons that, yes, I'll be the first to admit, didn't quite hit as I think the topic of its severity should. But not every at-bat needs to be a home run. Even getting a walk and getting on base is better than completely striking out and avoiding a difficult topic or bungling it beyond repair, which we can all agree is not the case in this story. And finally, there is evidence of A Calamity of Souls getting excellent reviews from readers and quite literally a jury of its peers, courtroom drama authors lauding it. With all this evidence, there would be no choice but to declare A Calamity of Souls not guilty for being a bad book.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, I will now hear your evidence.
Okay. So first, I want to talk about the predictability of this book. It's hard to present a book as predictable from quotes. And I get, like, it is a lot of, dare I say, vibes of there was a very small cast of characters and there's only a certain number of people this could be, and it was very obviously not the people that were actually on trial, the Washingtons. And then after that, it was obviously not the brother because that was just extremely obvious throughout the entire thing. So basically, you are left with the husband, Christine, the real estate agent, and the real estate agent's son. And it managed to be all four of those people. So you would be right in every single guess. So that's not really a surprise there.
I would like to give the defense a chance to give a rebuttal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fine point. It's interesting coming from someone who is on record saying they don't predict the outcome of books, saying it's a
Now,
predictable book.
gentlemen, let's keep it professional.
Right,
No,
which further, my point. I wasn't even trying to think about it, and I was like, okay, well, it can only be this person.
Yeah, perhaps as just a little cross the aisle talk here. I personally didn't really see it coming. Again, I wasn't really thinking that much about it, but in a lot of the courtroom dramas that I read, I guess, I feel like you are not necessarily introduced to every character like right away. Like another character is found. Yeah.
Right.
So I guess that's what I was kind of waiting for. I thought the twist was fine.
I thought it was too, but like as someone who doesn't think about books like predicting while they're reading it, even I saw it coming, and then looking back at the text, it was very obvious to anybody who was trying to figure out who did this. And I think that this is just, again, not to be laborious with the point. So I think this happens throughout. But the first time that you're sort of set up with Jack asking the accused, Jerome, about the blue convertible, he goes, a convertible? Yeah, you see the license plate? Virginia or out of state? I think Virginia by the color, but I can't swear to it, replied Jerome. The next question, do you know the Randolph's children by sight? I know Miss Christine. She come by right often. And Mr. Sam, he come by for a couple of times. But he ain't been by for a long time, at least not now So, like, it's just, like, right there. Let's talk about the children right after this convertible. That questioning didn't really make sense, except if you're trying to plant in the reader's mind the children convertible. So I think there's that throughout the novel that sort of, again, makes this not super surprising.
Yeah. He definitely doesn't want to build up an idea that there's other people out there.
Third party.
Right.
Yeah. Which I guess I kind of, even though I am defending this as not a bad book, this for sure qualifies in the like classic, like we describe it, like fluff book or beach read or airport book. Like you don't really have to pay that much attention to it, which maybe helps my case of like, you don't have to pay attention because there's just a slight twist with the characters that not like, whoa, where did this guy come from? So if you zone out a little bit, you really haven't missed that much. I don't know which way that helps, but
a palate cleanser, let's say. Yeah, I don't know that really helps your case.
Yeah. But like, I will say that I also didn't really mind the ending. I just thought it was predictable. So
I was going to say, as an impartial, even though I'm impartial in this, I would agree that I didn't mind it, but it was very predictable. I will say the only thing I thought was going to be a twist. So you guys had mentioned there was going to be a twist before I had finished reading. I thought that the mom was going to have killed his sister.
That would have been good. That would have been good. Yeah.
Because there was no point. I mean, this is getting really off track from our trial. So we're doing a sidebar. We're doing a sidebar right now. But like there was no point to his sister as an entire character, and also no point to her dying. And there's also like, and Phil, you may get into this in your prosecution.
I shall. Don't.
Okay,
mention
so
it then,
I'll
unbiased judge.
Okay. And does the defense have evidence that they would like to present?
The prosecution is sort of saying predictable plot. There, if I can sum that up correctly for the jury, correct? Their prosecution.
Yes.
So I will not fight that too much. We've all kind of agreed that we're all okay with the twist at the end, and yeah, maybe it wasn't the most clever thing, but it was still just didn't turn out to be like it was a book about something at least. It wasn't just Jerome was found guilty and it ended. So we have that.
Strong stance there.
I want to bring into the idea, and this is from the site, or I'm citing my source as Simon & Schuster, the book publisher, the 5 essential elements of a great story. And this book includes all of said elements. So the elements are a protagonist, antagonist, an inciting action, a conflict, and a resolution. So we have a protagonist, and he also, like I think a plus for this book, has a pretty clear and just cause. He is somewhat relatable. The author at the beginning of the book goes into how, hey, I was also a white guy growing up in the South. He was a little bit later, so like in the 70s instead of the 60s, but this was still the end, like right during, in our book, Martin Luther King had just been assassinated. Civil rights activism is really playing out, and they're fighting against the Jim Crow laws of the South, and where there was supposed to be separate but equal had just been repealed, and it was obvious that that had not actually been being taken place. So this unsegregating the South. So he's kind of fighting against that, and then now working with another kind of protagonist who is this badass black woman who is going, just tearing through the South, defending civil rights and blacks who are unjustly going through the court system. So we have Edmund Battle, one of the antagonists, who's the attorney general, who is pushing the government's racist agenda, but softens up a little at the end. You find out his son is working for civil rights as well, and really is kind of like respectful of Desiree and Jack at the end for clearly winning and finding the right people and making the law actually go through. And then Howard Pickett, the really hateable antagonist, rich guy, wants to just prop up a racist government in Virginia and across the United States. You have the inciting action, which is just like the event that occurs. So you have Jerome and then also Pearl. So you have actually multiple in this book. And then the conflict, they're being framed, but they obviously didn't do it, and the lawyers have to find their way out. And then the resolution, they do find the real killer. This is the prosecution's main hang-up, I think, so far on their first bit of evidence, saying that this resolution wasn't really that satisfactory. But I think that the twist was fine for a good story. And then there was another twist where Jerome actually ends up dying anyway. So I think there was a curlicue instead of just a twist there at the end. All going into Simon Schuster's frame of a great story, all fitting into that frame. So in summary, a defense of it has every single element of a good story. Maybe some things, again, are lacking, but bad story or bad book, there's nothing to hang your hat on there.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, Judge can make the ruling. Isaac just summarized that this has a plot. Congrats. I don't know if that is a
order.
Point,
I will have an order.
There you go. Okay.
Although I do see your point, Mr. P. Cornell, I will say that in this case, I have to rule with the defense, Mr. I. Cornell, and there is a point in favor of him. But I would like to hear your next points, so I will go back to the prosecution.
Yeah. Okay. So my next point is that just everybody in this story was relatively uninspired, and I want to focus on just one of the people that I think was supposed to be one of the most complex characters was Hilly, and she was the mom. She was raised in Appalachia and had this complex relation with race. Everyone in this town had this complex relationship with race, which I think that that's fine, but the dialogue in this book was very Nora Roberts. No, not, but that's fine for a book.
Right.
Nora Roberts-esque in the sense that DuBose was asking Hilly about this relationship because Hilly was rude to her. And so she talks about, I knew this man named Joshua. He grew up to be one of the most handsome men and even better, a kind one. and he was black, and that was sort of her relationship. She had a black friend when she was a kid, but then was raised in a really white community because the mom of Joshua told her that they couldn't be together. And so that this is how it reads. I'll just read it to you, and I think it will make my point. I know she didn't, because she told me so right to my face. I would ruin her beautiful son's life. I would take him away from this world, his kind, and worst of all, I'd be condemning him to death. And how did that make you feel, Hilly? Asked DeBose in a cautious tone. It angered me. It made me think there was no way through, no way at all. And before then, like, how did that make you feel? And like just completely over explaining every single thing, like we're in a psychologist. It's just too much. Leave something to the reader to dissect, rather than have every character not only react and show action that's so aggressive and so just obvious, but then explain what they felt during all of this. It's just too much. There's nothing left to the reader there, and it's poorly done if you can't convey these emotions without having the readers literally saying these completely unrealistic conversations to make sure that the reader gets the point.
That's some pretty damning evidence. I'm going to pass it to the defense to see what they can do to mitigate this situation.
Yeah. Quite honestly, I cannot defend the dialogue either. Fortunately, I'm not defending the dialogue. I'm defending the entire book. I will give a nod to the defense. Yes, very Nora Robert-esque in their emoting and how they think about emotions and pass that in words to each other. Somewhat difficult at times. Fortunately, I think from my first point, I thought that this, how the prosecution aptly describing the plot of a book. So yes, it did have a plot, and the plot carried it long enough to keep the reader engaged that the dialogue could be dealt with, I guess. I would like to say that while, yes, the dialogue could be trying at times, there was some quotes, and I have some quotes as well, of the overall message of anti-racism in the book is an important message that should be talked about and should be brought to light. I know we've talked about several times in this podcast how, like, even when a message of a minority or a message of people who are underrepresented is not landed 100% correct, I think it is better than it not being talked about at all. And people writing these books where, David Baldacci is a white man writing about racism, it's a tough sell, but I think it's an important thing that is continued to be written about and talked about, because it obviously is still as much of a problem, which is like really sad, but as much as a problem as it was then, in different ways, but still like a huge civil issue.
Yeah, and I think I just want to say too, even though I'm jumping in to help the defense here, I think there was a part of me that was thinking, like, sometimes it shouldn't be the people who are being discriminated against that are saying something. It's like the allies of those people. So I really do think the intent behind this book and David Baldacci's intent was to be an ally and to spread the word about this situation in the Jim Crow South from a white man's perspective. Like, I do think that was what he was trying to do.
I love both of you just walking right into this trap that I have set. Because I would argue that intent is not what matters at all. Intent is
It can still be damning.
yes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and intent, you need follow through. And if you're truly intent on doing this, you would do your research, or you would make sure that your point isn't lost. I do agree with Isaac that it's a good thing to talk about and a good thing to write about, but just pure intent does not vindicate this book.
Okay. So I've got some, I just have two of DeBose's words. I'll just read one of them that I mean, like, I think it's a clear message that if just taken on its own, it's a lesson or a message for the book that is in a positive, no matter how you perceived the entire book, it's a message that can be taken for good. So a great nation can never realize its full potential until all its citizens are allowed to realize theirs. And the rest of the world is not waiting for us to get our house in order. They are moving forward in ways that are best for them, not for us. By battling each other, we're literally fighting with one arm tied behind our back and for no good reason at all. And this is one of her courthouse stands. So I think, like, I don't know, I'd like to hear what you have to combat against that, Phil, but if this entire book was written and you hated everything else, that's a good lesson, and it is a good message for someone to take away from this. So that's kind of my point. Is I agree. I think that, like, it's a really hard topic to talk about. I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect way to do it. We've read a multitude of books about racism and ex-slaves and stuff, and some of them, like, critically acclaimed, that just, like, went over our heads. So this is like a really milk toast book about this, I guess, but that is not a bad thing.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I will accept that argument. I think that that's correct. I think that especially, like, a powerful quote like that or a great lesson like that is good. And that in isolation is good. But I think that Baldacci makes a egregious sort of lack of awareness in other parts that, unfortunately, taking this book as a whole cannot be, like, you can't take just the quote. It's the whole book. And the only piece of evidence I want to present on this is, I'm just going to read it and let the reader draw their conclusion. Lucy is his
mentally handicapped sister, and so that's the character. And then Jerome is the black man that was accused of the crime. And it reads, Pearl and Miss Jessup told us about it. And do you recall the make and model of the car he drove? Jerome looked down at his shoes. It be light gray with white trim. I remember that. Every time that Lucy is mentioned, she reads, Mama, Daddy, it be Jack. And equating that phrase of it be, which is the only thing that Lucy says the entire time, to the words exactly only ever spoken by the black defendant is it's too egregious to say, okay, just because DeBose said something cool, like, this book is, it is just very unthought through, not, like, intent is good. That should have been corrected. Like, if he was actually thinking about this, you should not have equated the black defendant with the mentally handicapped turn of phrase. Well, I think it's a really good point to mention, Phil, speaking truthfully about the intent versus execution. And I think, it's also fair for us to say, as three white people perceiving this, from our perspective, it's obviously racism was horrible and Jim Crow was horrible and slavery was horrible. But it's very hard to know how a book like this specifically impacts the people who this book is about, which is the Black community in America who suffered this. And, it's just something I was thinking about throughout, which I think this book did raise awareness for me about, they were saying the judge who was trying this case was in the KKK, and that there are still people alive today that are practicing law and sitting on juries potentially that could have been in the KKK. If he's saying everyone in the South in that time period was, it's actually kind of crazy to think about, and it's scary to think about. But I definitely think, Phil, you bring up a really good point. I see what Isaac is saying, and I was falling prey to that as well. But I think you've convinced me as the judge, and hopefully the readers as well, on that point.
Yeah,
So
and I do want to say that I didn't walk away from this book learning nothing about race either. I think that one of the things that just sort of is hammered home is that Brown v. Board being enforced 15 years after Brown v. Board, which I think
yeah,
was pretty wild to me. So I think that was a
yeah,
good point and an interesting one that was brought up.
yeah.
Yeah, good
So
find, Phil. I didn't realize. I mean, that was like a very investigative find for you to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So before I make a final ruling on if this book is guilty of being a bad book, I will hear closing arguments from the prosecution. And if they don't have any, then I will turn it over to the defense.
Yeah, I want to just cede my time back to the judge. I think I've presented a good enough case that you don't have to hear it.
The defense?
Yep. So the only I think I've made my point as well. The last thing I'll say, just remember we are on trial for if this is a bad book or not. We are only three people with very distinct reading styles. This book has 25,000 5-star reviews on Goodreads and an entire 5-page article of quotes from courthouse drama authors acclaiming it. From my favorite, this is David Baldacci at his best, using the law and courtroom as a stage for a searing parable on race and the cost and courage to do the right thing. Michael Connolly, my favorite author. So while I will secede that this book was not perfect, I think Phil brought up a multiple good things, especially with the his last point equating the race to the mentally handicapped, and that was just a huge oversight. I don't think you could ever call this a bad book. I would tell someone to go read this book if they're hanging out, need a quick read. I think it was like 8 hours long or 10 hours long or something. You could read this on a beach vacation. You could read this on a long flight and probably get something out of it.
Okay. Thank you to both of you. I am ready to make my ruling, and I rule in favor of the prosecution. This was a bad book. I could be biased, but this was a bad book for all the things that Phil said. I had one quote. I know Isaac is laughing. Are you surprised, Isaac?
I mean, 25,000 5-star good 5-star reviews.
I mean, from the woman the judge that gave Nora Roberts a 2-star, I'm a little shooketh myself.
Yeah, I think the race is where he went wrong.
That's
Nora
true.
Roberts didn't try to attack. Nora Roberts didn't make a fluff book and then try to attack like social justice in it. And I think that's where he went wrong. And I think Isaac, you made a great point. We were talking about this earlier. Like, just be like Michael Connolly and write about crime. You know, I just think like you're potentially, like Phil was saying, doing more harm than good by sending a message to people that. Yeah, I don't see the value in this other than I think there's ways to send the messages about Jim Crow and all this other stuff without making a lot of the blunders that David Baldacci did.
Yeah, I think this book could have been written in modern day and have the exact same storyline, and the defendant could have been a black man, and you just don't go into the whole Jim Crow stuff and just let it subtly sit there, and people are going to be smart enough to realize what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And that gets your message across far more than this Nora Roberts dialogue that Phil ripped apart.
I had one other quote that I thought was very problematic and was really not addressed. And this was when he talked to Ashby, which this scene was also completely unnecessary. He went into Ashby's house to talk to him about Miss Jessup.
100%. Yeah.
And he said, you just told me you're old with not much time left. Why do you give a damn what people think? I just do. And you love her. Look, son, I said she was different, exotic, so to speak. This house here, do you know it stands on the exact spot where a plantation owner's home used to be? No, I didn't know that. Bet he slept with his slave women. And I'm also sure those poor women had no choice in the matter. And then he does end up leaving, getting mad and leaving. Jack does. But it's not after there was no like, that's not an okay thing to say about a Black woman being exotic, equating her to an exotic thing. Just that entire conversation was problematic and also not really addressed, just poorly done overall.
I
So
do think, and I'm glad that you brought that point up, Phoebe. I think one of my like bugaboos about social justice at all is, oh, just let them die. Those people will die. And that's sort of the stance he takes. And I hate that because people are living longer and longer. And it just takes, I mean, take someone who's 65 years old. A lot of people are just like, oh, let them, like, oh, can't teach an old dog new tricks. That person's going to be living for another 35 years potentially.
Yeah, that's a great point, Phil.
Yeah. Well, great job, you guys. And I'm very curious to hear what our listeners think about this. We tried to do a kind of corny but kind of fun courtroom style to defend this book. And so I hope you all enjoyed it. And that will take us into our ratings, which I think you can guess from Phil and I's stance. I was actually a 0.5. I didn't even give it a 1.
I'm gonna give it a 0, actually. After giving it more thought, I'm gonna go full 0
He convinced
here.
himself.
I did.
I was convinced by the prosecution. I had a 2 originally. I'm doing a 1 now, I think.
Yeah. I think you just you recommend that to someone and they read it and they're like,
Yeah.
they come up
Because
with the same conversation we do, and it's like, whoa, why would he recommend?
I'm
this
thinking
book
of
to me?
the books I would say if you like this book, I would just recommend one of those books instead. So
Yeah. So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, going into the recommendations, if you like this book, read a Nora Roberts book. We read Mind Games earlier this year. Or The Women, because it gives kind of a historical, but it's the same style of writing that you see in this book. And so that's what I would recommend. Isaac, what about you?
So like I said, Michael Connelly is my favorite author. So he writes the Lincoln Lawyer series. So that's great. But I'm actually going to recommend the John Grisham's The Reckoning. It's actually, I think, the only John Grisham book that I've read, but there is a similar race aspect in it. And I don't know if that is common in his writing or not, but I just thought a lot better book, and still the race is a subject in it.
Yeah. So I think that's that one is good. I like Grisham a lot. Race is usually a subject. I believe he's from Alabama, so race is usually a subject. So he writes the Southern crime. I think if you really did love this book, Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult,
Yes,
is
great
extremely
recommendation,
similar. Where it's sort of modern times. I think it's better done than this one, and it leaves a little bit more to the reader. But honestly, like, let's just say, yeah, read To Kill a Mockingbird. If you've already read it, read it again. It's better. But I do think it is unfortunate that we have sort of a dearth of Black authors that were writing about their struggle during this time. And so all of our recommendations are by white authors about Black books, which is, again, unfortunate. I think that goes to speak of maybe where we should try looking for books, and hopefully we do that in our new year of books, getting diverse perspective. And I think that you'll get that from our new book of James by Percival Everett. So
yeah, very excited for that. Yeah, Isaac, that is our first read of 2025. It is James, and I believe it won the 2024 National Book Award for Fiction. So yeah, Isaac, would you be able to tell us about that? We're going to read it on January 13th.
So James by Percival Everett is about Jim, who becomes a runaway slave after he hears that he's going to be sold by his owner, Miss Watson, and separated from his family. He escapes to a nearby island, but is very quickly joined by a local boy, Huckleberry Huck Finn, who has faked his death in hopes of getting away from his abusive father. The chain of events sets Jim and Huck off on an adventure down the Mississippi River, resulting in a variety of colorful, dangerous, and at times tragic encounters as they make their way down the river. Meanwhile, Jim has his own goals of finding a way to free his wife and daughter. He also has to keep himself and Huck alive in the process, as well as preserve his dignity and reclaim his identity.
Yeah, I'm very excited about reading this. I've heard many good things from many different sources. And have you heard anything about it? Are you excited about it?
I've heard only good things.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, Happy New Year, everybody. If you're watching us, I have a little wine here to celebrate our last episode of the season and it being the new year. So happy New Year to all. Thank you guys all seriously so much from the bottom of our hearts for the support. I cannot believe we are a year into this, about to go into our second year, and I can't wait to see what next year holds. Really appreciate all the support. Really appreciate all the discussion with you two. It's been awesome. I am closer than ever to both of you, and that's really special. So this is a bi-weekly reminder to call someone that you love, tell them that you love them, tell them about a good book that you've recently read. Go to your library, check out a good book, use your Libby app. Until we talk again, stay classy, second pagers. We'll see you later. Happy New Year.
Bye, guys.
See you guys.